Our faces.
Nice.
Yay, no more scary faces.
But then this last year we put into our budget a program where if a Main Street manager calls us up and says, this is a particular issue I'm wrestling with in my community, I would love some extra help. Can we bring in some experts to talk about it? We will throw that together as fast as possible to bring that curated to the community. Westbrook was the first one to ask, and so we put this together. We've invited our audience around the state to join in remotely. If they want to listen into this topic, it might pertain to them, but this is curated specifically for Westbrook today.
Can't help but thank all of our sponsors that support the work here at the Downtown Center and enable us to work directly with Westbrook and all our other communities. And Kara will be telling us about Build Maine, I'm sure, at some point, which is on our slide. The webinar is being recorded. If you have questions, for those of you that are attending the webinar remotely, there's a chat feature down at the bottom. If you press the chat icon, it'll call up on the right-hand side questions that we'll be monitoring as people are speaking. And we'll also be taking questions from you guys here as well. And we'll make sure that our speakers can hear those questions and work with the audio as best we can. And these are all the people that are here today. Nicole Losch, I hope I said that right. Nicole, is it Losch or Losch?
Losch, you got it right.
All right. Senior Transportation Planner with the City of Burlington, Vermont, and Bob Van Luling. Bob, did I say your last name right?
Perfect.
Okay, with our Maine Department of Transportation, Kara Wilbur, right here in the room with us from Build Maine, Ann Ball, Robert, and Abigail. So Abigail is going to make a few kind of, I'm going to stop sharing the screen. Okay, hold on one second. All right. Oh, well, I don't dare try that. I know. Okay. So, Abigail, can they see you?
Can they?
Yes.
Okay.
There you go. I can't see myself, but as long as so I'm just giving an overview of today, right?
Yeah, this was your idea.
I know.
That's why we're all here. So, yes.
Oh, sorry. Got distracted. So thank you all for coming today. This is a thing that we've talked about in the past. I brought it to the events team, which is the city staff that's here today, because the design committee, which our members are here for that today, are working on some tactical urbanism projects for Westbrook. And we just, some of them are permissible under current laws, but some, you guys wanted to hear examples of other places where they've worked, how other cities have made it happen, which is why we connected with Nicole, because they've implemented a city-run program in Burlington to address some of these issues. We want to do like a quick response to issues, pedestrian safety issues, all sorts of things like that, which is the purpose of the tactical urbanism projects that we want to do. So we have a few in mind, which we've shared with past, and I've shared with a couple of our speakers, just some areas in the downtown as far as very wide crosswalks or what else, wide lanes and things like that. So Nicole's going to be talking about that, and Kara is going to be talking a little bit about Build Maine's Lightning Grant program for tactical urbanism. And I think a little bit also on, you've done a little work with communities, not to even go into a lot of detail on that, but if something pops up during questions, obviously we'd look to your guidance on that too. So that's why we're here. Thank you all for coming. And
Great.
Did I miss anything?
I don't
Do you
think
have any
so.
questions before we start?
Yeah, any questions? Okay. Out of curiosity, how many in the room have been to Burlington, Vermont? I know we're handing it to Karen next, but I'm checking. Wow. So Nicole, that was about, I don't know, 70%? 7 of 10. But that's good to know. I'm sure that she likes that, hearing that. Okay. Kara. Yeah, probably because of the audio. Sit right where I am.
Hi.
Should I look this way?
I was having that. Either way.
So I am with the Build Main Campus, which we're in our 6th year of bringing together people from across the state to talk about how to improve the planning work in our downtowns and our communities to make safer streets that create more economic vitality and that look to, affordable solutions to do that. So we, in the past few years too, have started directing some of our proceeds to a technical urbanism lightning grant program, which we set up to sort of help prop up, some of the ideas we've been hearing at the conference and connect communities and local efforts with funding and technical resources. So we've done one project in Sanford so far, which involved trying to connect 2 schools within the community through the downtown and really slowing down traffic through some intersections where there are conflicts between people walking and people driving. So really trying to slow down traffic in some key locations. And then we just got our 2nd application from Augusta to do some twinkle lights and activate some public space. So that's a little less complex of a project, but still within the realm of what we try to encourage for communities. So that's sort of the overview of the Lightning Grant Program, and it's open. It's a rolling grant program, and communities are welcome to submit it anytime. We're working on our lightning piece of it. It's not quite lightning yet, but we're getting there. We have representation from the DOT. Steve Landry's on the committee, and also we're trying to find some police. Our last rep kind of didn't work out, so if you know anyone, maybe. So that's the general overview of the program.
Applications will be on the Build Main website.
Yep. There's a button on the homepage of the website that has all the.
Nicole?
Yep.
So Nicole, go ahead and share your screen, and let's just make sure the group can hear you. You guys should be able to see her slides up there, but the audio's not. The Bluetooth was a disaster, so we're just going to see how this works.
All right, so hopefully you can see my screen.
Yes.
Okay, and can you hear me okay?
Yep, they are good.
Excellent. Okay, so thanks so much for inviting me today and for accommodating this through the webinar. We've been doing a lot of tactical urbanism and quick build projects here in Burlington over the last 18 months or more. And I'm excited to kind of talk about how we've developed this and how hopefully this can be some inspiration for some other New England communities. So, I've really structured this around the different ways that we approach tactical urbanism and quick build here. I don't get into my technical details, but I'm happy to answer any nitty-gritty questions as we go along. If I can advance my slides, then that would be easier. There we go. Okay. So, the first thing we often ask ourselves as we're doing these projects is trying to just understand why this is important. And for us, I work in our public works department. I've been here for almost 15 years, and we are often constrained with our staffing and our funding, but we also understand that we are stewards of our public right-of-way, and our streets are some of our biggest public spaces. And so we see this as an opportunity to invest what time and money we do have in public safety projects. Using this approach, we can do a lot more at once. And so what we found is that our quick build projects cost about 25% compared to a traditional construction project. So we're able to do a lot more for safety improvements in a shorter time frame. It also helps us build momentum with the community to get interest and support in these types of projects. Also, though, it lets us adapt and make any changes to any of these projects before we come in for that full reconstruction. A lot of the approaches that we have, when we initially developed this program and some of these projects, there were a lot of questions about, are these kind of legal projects? Do they comply with the design guides and standards that are out there? Traditionally, our engineers use, the highway capacity manual, the state's green book, and then manual and uniform traffic control devices. We've really looked to the NACDO design guides more recently. They still comply with these other design guides, and what we found is by following all of these guides, we found a way to still follow a traditional design approach, just use different materials. Some of the key principles in the NACDO guides that are kind of leading us to advance our projects is, again, recognizing our streets, our public spaces, that are, as we can transform our streets and make them great streets, they can be really great for businesses. We're designing for safety. We're designing for our streets as ecosystems. So as we come back for more permanent construction, we're trying to find ways to incorporate stormwater management and better sustainable and environmental systems. We recognize that our streets can be changed. They've changed over time. I mean, Burlington was originally designed for horses. They've evolved. We're now in the era of really accommodating cars, but kind of transitioning into what we're seeing as more of an interest in accommodating bicyclists, transit in a better way, and pedestrians. And so we're trying to find ways that we can act now. And there are a lot of ways that we can change our streets in a shorter time frame. There are a lot of opportunities for intersection design criteria as well. And so our general approach as we're looking at intersections is to design them to be as compact as possible. Recognize that these are shared spaces. This is the one place where all of these different modes come together, and we need to find a way to make everyone visible, to make the movements predictable, and make sure everyone is safe in these spaces. Intersections are also usually an opportunity to find kind of excess space, and oftentimes this can be just quickly transformed into some public space. And we're designing thinking of the future that we want to provide for our community. And oftentimes we'll involve the community in that process, both with the construction and also just identifying what it is that they want to see in the street. So as we've developed our approach to trying to deliver these projects, we have basically a lot of options, and a project doesn't need to follow this in order as it's shown here. They can kind of jump in at any point along this kind of project delivery schedule. But at its shortest time frame, we can do demonstrations. Sometimes these are an hour, they can be a week long, they can be city-led, or we have a permit process that allows the community to lead these as well. We also have a pilot program. This is established in our city ordinance, actually. It allows us to do these for up to 30 days. That's our most common. But occasionally we'll have a bigger project, and so we will consider how to do it for a longer time frame, and that allows us to just collect a lot more data and allow the community to really adjust to these big changes before making a final decision. The interim design phase, or our quick build approach, is really kind of mirroring the footprint of a permanent construction project, but we're just using materials that are less expensive and quicker to install, with the intent that it will be in place for usually up to 5 years while we program the funding to come back in and reconstruct it. So I'll walk through a little bit about our demonstration projects themselves. Again, these are ones that the city can lead, or we can work with the community to let them lead a project themselves. And demonstrations are kind of in our blood here in Burlington. The Church Street Marketplace is one of our most iconic destinations. If you've been to Burlington, I'm sure you've walked along Church Street. It's our pedestrian marketplace, and it started as just a day-long demonstration. There was a lot of controversy initially. There was a lot of concern that this was going to have a really negative impact on the businesses. And I mean, it's still, it's not an easy space to maintain. It requires a lot of attention and work, but through that demonstration, it has become this continuing project. Started in just one block, and now we're up to 4 blocks of our downtown. Most recently, we have heard a lot of interest from the community in trying to do more. With the projects that we're trying to develop, we can only do so much, and we're often pressed to just be able to do more. And so in 2015, we were approached by some parents at a local elementary school. They wanted to do a protected bike lane demonstration. And at the time, we ultimately said no, and that was really because they were getting conflicting information from our department, from the fire department, from all of the technical resources in the city. And so we were trying to figure out ourselves, like, how do we help a community member get through this kind of process and get a consistent answer so that we can allow this type of project if we think it's one that can be done safely. So since that time, we've developed this whole demonstration guide, and they actually used that guide and installed this very same project just last year. And so this was a community effort. You know, the kids came out from the school to help with the installation. It was in place for just a week. They learned a lot through this process. They provided a little report at the end that gave us a lot of information. And I think, you know, one of the most beneficial things from the city's perspective is, I think, you know, the neighborhood and the community came into this thinking it was going to be so easy and that we would learn a lot and be able to quickly just build this project after. And what we all found is it's a complex project. It was difficult to install, took a lot to maintain during the way, and there are several things we still need to work out before we could come in to do this permanently. But we did see that there is a lot of interest in making this a permanent project, and that we do need to continue to have those conversations and find a way to build this. So it's really helped continue that conversation and keep that momentum going. For the community demonstration process itself, the reason that we thought this was important to really define, and this guide is available on our website. I have a link at the very end of the presentation as well, if you'd like to find it there. But again, we wanted to be able to outline a clear process for the community, when we wanted to be able to give them consistent answers about what to expect, what was allowed. From the city, we wanted to understand where the community's interests really were. You know, what projects were important, what types of issues were important to them. It helps us develop our work plans in the future. It also helps us widen public engagement opportunities and collect some data from these short-term projects. It helps us test concepts that we may be toying with and can, again, kind of expedite delivery of the projects. It also helps us just build new relationships, whether it's the city building relationships with other community partners or the community members themselves building relationships with everyone that they've had to work with to roll these projects out. Through this whole thing, though, we emphasize the need for a safety first approach. We are letting the community kind of work in the streets. We need to make sure they're doing it safely. And so we have incorporated some elements there to make sure that that they are safe and that this is all being done in a safe manner. There are a lot of different ways that we can pull these kind of projects together. If these are really short-term projects, you know, we've worked with our local flower supply company, just loaned some flowers for the day. Craft stores are a great resource. We have a small lumber yard and a kind of reuse zone, and so we've shopped from all of these places to try to pull things together for these very short-term projects. When we developed our community demonstration program, we did have a series of demonstration projects that we used as kind of a test case to figure this out. And so we worked with a local engineering firm to design the projects, and then worked with our local advocacy group to find the volunteers to build this and make it happen. We provided some of the materials, the community provided some of the materials. We ran across the street at one point to the hardware store to try to borrow some other things. And this is just one example of one of our projects, and this was a curb extension. We did 2 of them at this intersection, one to shorten an existing crosswalk and make pedestrians a little bit more visible around some parked cars, and also created a seating area and kind of a plaza in a no parking area that was just sort of unused space. And we tied this all together with a big community event so that we could get a lot of input from people that we knew were already going to be there. So it was a good opportunity both to test out the whole installation process, but also get feedback from people without kind of having to pull them in there. They were already on site. We could just quickly run all this by them. This is just the snapshot of the whole permit process. And I won't go into any detail here, but it's not necessarily the fastest process, which isn't ideal for the community, but again, it's a clear process, and it makes sure that everything is designed and can be installed safely. Another great resource, if you aren't familiar with it, is the Tactical Urbanist Guide. This is a web-based book. You can also download or order an actual copy, but it's a really good resource for materials and just general suggestions for project types that you may be thinking about to get some of this done quickly with just community members. Our local AARP branch is one of our, just the region's biggest supporters and advocates of these type of projects too. They do something similar to the lightning grants that you guys are offering. And one thing that they funded is Local Motion is our local advocacy group, and they created a trailer of all of these kind of tactical urbanism supplies. And so this is just available at all times. They tour around the state and they do pop-up projects all the time, sometimes tied with other events and sometimes part of a planning process or testing out a project that a community has been grappling with. So this is a really good resource for our community and maybe something that you would want to think about having. We've developed something similar for our own projects. We do a lot of demonstrations typically to kind of showcase new project types or new materials and get the community's feedback before we come in and do the installation. We will often do this as part of like a pop-up meeting. And so this photo is just an example of an area where we were thinking about doing a quick build curb extension. We were going to install new types of pavement markings for this new bikeway. And so we did a pop-up project showcasing some of these materials, posted signs in the neighborhood earlier in the day, and then basically just sat on site for a few hours to let the community come by, ask questions, and give us feedback. So the other type of project that we do are our pilots, and we do these typically when we need more data. And if we need more community process to understand if this is really going to be supported at the end of the pilot. These are usually bigger projects, but they let us test potential impacts. They can often just let us test the materials themselves. And again, gauge community support to understand their reaction to the change. We also use pilots frequently to test impacts on emergency services. We have a really good working relationship with our fire department. When we do these pilots, we'll often schedule a time that we can meet them on site. They can take their largest vehicles to see if they're able to navigate or have any constraints or concerns. We also will work with them to understand how any of these changes may be impacting their response times. And so we're constantly checking in with them to see how our projects are impacting them when we do our pilots. The real difference between a pilot and like a permanent construction project is they're adjustable. We're measuring them and we want to make sure they're supported at the end. Compared to one of our demonstrations or our tactical urbanism projects, those may not have as much data collection. If there is data collection, it may not be as well defined early on, and there's really not a clear process to understand the level of support at the end. And so when we're establishing a pilot program or a pilot project, we're really, at the beginning, clearly defining what the project is, clearly defining at the start what metrics we are going to measure, and then clearly defining how the community is going to be involved and how a decision is going to be made at the end. One tool that's often helpful with all of our projects is just a way to visualize what's going to change on the street. There is a great tool online called Street Mix that allows you to do this kind of cross-section of a street, and it's really just a mix and match platform. You can change all of the measurements and the street features that are included there. But this can be a helpful component as you're developing designs. Not everyone is familiar with sort of that plan view. It's hard to visualize, and so this can be a good resource. The other metrics that are sometimes helpful to consider are things like crashes, travel times. If you're doing the type of project that is going to change how traffic is operating, you may want to measure traffic speeds or volumes. You may want to measure the volumes of other modes as well. and also measuring public input that can often be as important, sometimes more important than all of the hard data itself. So we're always collecting both the quantitative and the qualitative data with all of our pilots. And again, keeping the community informed. Burlington has really involved community, and so we need to be clear about how, when, and where they can provide input or specifically inform the decisions. We take a lot of time to try to meet people where they are when we're getting this information. We use a lot of surveys and polls, and we recognize again that the public opinion can also hold more weight than some of the hard data that we've collected. So our last kind of quick build approach in our interim design program, we just have developed over the last year. We have a new design guide as well. So again, we have a link to this on our website, and I've placed this at the end of the presentation, but this is available for anybody to use. It has really two components in the guide itself. One, we developed design standards, and we wanted to develop these so that we could have expedited delivery even with these small projects. So this has allowed us to really define, how wide can a curb extension be? What are the angles of the curb extensions that we need leading into it, recognizing that our intent is to leave these year round. The snowplows need to be able to operate around them. Emergency vehicles need to be able to get by. So all of these level of details have been included for all types of projects. And we've also developed our material standards. This will likely evolve over time as we identify new materials that we want to try, or realizing that some are not working well. But again, this helps us, we can do some quick cost estimates at the beginning of the year, have available quotes ready, and just quickly order materials and get a project moving without taking a lot of time to figure out how we're actually going to find the materials to make these projects happen. So this has all helped us to roll out a lot of projects over the last 18 months. We've also been able to take a lot of our projects that started out as community demonstrations and turn them into a more quick build approach. And so one example was a project that was another AARP grant project. They worked with one of our local businesses that has a machine that can kind of build any furniture that you'd like. And so they sort of made this prefab furniture that the community came together and assembled, and then took it out on site for this weekend-long demonstration that they did at an intersection. This is an intersection that has a couple of small neighborhood businesses. It's in a part of town that's kind of going through some changes, getting a little bit more redevelopment and activity. And so we're hearing a lot about the need to improve this intersection. So this was a weekend-long demonstration, and since then we were able to come back the following year and turn this into an actual quick build. This shortens the pedestrian crossings. We're still accommodating a lot of large vehicles that are needing to get through this intersection. And we're coming back actually at the end of this year to turn this into a fully reconstructed intersection. This is one where we know it's worked well, and we don't need to wait 5 years before we can come back in to reconstruct it. Another project that started as a demonstration and then quickly moved into our quick build approach, we did a protected bike lane demonstration. We just used these small wooden craft boxes from the craft store, borrowed some mums from our gardener supply, and tested this out with the fire department. It went well, so we came back 2 years later and installed this as a quick build. We used this with plastic bases and these flexible posts. This stayed year-round as well. We used our sidewalk plows to keep it open. This has definitely been a learning project for us, both for materials and just the general layout. So we're continuing to evolve this one and identify ways to really make it work year-round for everyone who's trying to use the street. It's impacted both by the plows and by cars on a relatively narrow roadway. So this is an area where it's been helpful to try this quick build approach, so that if we are going to build a permanent protected lane here, we really know some of the design challenges that we have to work around. And with our quick builds, they don't always have to be pretty. We've done some just as quickly as we can with whatever materials we have. Most recently, we had an intersection that was just built a little too large. It's over capacity for what the community needs right now. So we closed one of our 2 right turn lanes at this intersection. We just use our standard orange construction barrels. Those stayed all summer, and then before winter, we came in and replaced them with just standard Jersey barriers that we knew would hold up to the plowing over the winter time. I also wanted to just walk through a little bit, give you an example of a really rural town that has done some of this as well. You know, even though Burlington isn't that large, sometimes it's seen that we can kind of push the envelope a little bit more because we're a more urban environment, but this can really happen in all kinds of community sizes. And Bethel is also an area that has the state route and state highway running right down the middle of it. And so they worked with our Agency of Transportation and were able to do this whole Better Blocks Street program that was another AARP funded project. And in this photo, you can even see some of the things that they installed, a little bike lane / wider pedestrian area. They tried to enhance the crosswalks, did some curb extensions, added seating areas in the street, and it turned out to be really successful. You know, they started out with the basic concept that they showcased to AARP and the community. They installed it, and part of the other project was they had a couple of vacant buildings in the downtown, and they worked with all their local artists or just community members and did a bunch of pop-up shops to get people out onto the street. And Bethel, if you aren't familiar, is a town that was pretty decimated from Tropical Storm Irene several years ago, and they have been doing a lot of these kind of community projects to keep their community going, and they've really found that working together has helped them rebuild their community after some of that damage. So I saw some examples of some areas that you were interested in improving over in Westbrook. And so I was trying to scan through and think about some potential ideas for doing quick build approach in your projects. So first, just kind of an overview of understanding, are you going to do a quick build? Are you going to do a more interim design? Do you think you need to do a pilot? And so some of the questions that you may want to ask as you're developing this is just trying to understand, are you introducing a concept? If so, you may want to do a shorter term project to really gauge the impact and the support. If you need to collect clear feedback or collaborate with other agencies, you may want to consider a pilot. The same for collecting data and building support. If you need to have a lot of documentation to show why this could be a successful project, a pilot may be the way to go. If you're just redesigning or trying to install a project based on existing feedback or advocating for safety improvements, you can usually just jump right into one of the quick builds or the interim design approaches. And to find funding, you can kind of use any of the approaches if you're really just trying to advocate for a way to have this be a more permanent installation. So one of the areas that, that was highlighted as an area that is just an asphalt sidewalk. I don't know much about the context of the other businesses nearby, but you know, I'm a big fan of using paint. It's easy to install. It can be a great way to involve the community, and it can quickly visually transform an area. So this is just an example of a neighborhood. This is actually in Montreal, where they've painted the entire sidewalk and paired it with a parklet just for some public seating nearby. Whether or not the parklet is a possibility, just the option to add some seating nearby or some plants can go a long way to improve the streetscape. The little photo at the bottom is a series of these street seats that our transit agency has been installing lately, and they're just these small wooden cubes that was another AARP funded project to provide seating, typically at bus stops that didn't have an available shelter or seating, but these can be used anywhere. They can be branded or colored in any way that you want, and it's a really low cost way to add some seating or other elements onto your streets. There are a couple of areas where there was interest in either adding a crosswalk or narrowing an existing crosswalk. And we have found these paint and planter-based curb extensions to be really useful for narrowing intersections and crosswalks. These can also just be used mid-block to narrow a street. And you can test out a new crosswalk just with temporary paint. With a hard rain, it washes away quickly. That said, you would want to check just basic data to make sure this is an area that you do indeed want to install a crosswalk, but there are some great materials that you can use to try it out. For wide intersections, there are several things that you can try to do, similar to the planter curb extensions that we just showed in the last image. If this is an area with a lot of pedestrian crossings, you can use these really short-term medians that's shown in the top photo. So these are just straw bales and temporary paint. You can also paint the entire intersection. These can be really fun community projects, whether it's with a school or just a community group that is interested in showcasing something in the intersection. Because you're a northern community also, you probably know paint will fade every year. So if it is a community project, it's just always something we like to let them know that they're gonna have to paint it every year. Another opportunity, you have some great little medians that are built at some of the crosswalks, but they are flush with the ground and often hard to see. And so you can add planters. You can try it out with just these, really low cost wooden crate style planters, or you can try something that is a little bit larger and more substantial. And then an area that maybe is just too wide, you could try, a really big project like a parking protected bike lane that we tried for a weekend. You can also do something smaller of, typically these fog lines in the parking line that's shown here is just a 4-foot painted line. Even changing that to, 4-inch painted line, even if you just change that to 8 inches, something as small as that visual change can often narrow the roadway. But those planter curb extensions are another way to try to just visually change the street enough to encourage drivers to slow down and recognize that something else is happening here. So as we kind of put this all together, and asking ourselves, how do we help communities get to yes on a lot of these types of projects? These are really safety projects. They're community safety and they're community building. They support our local businesses and our communities. They're a good way to build partnerships, and sometimes it's just a matter of finding the right people who can help advance these projects and make it all happen. It's usually helpful to, with your first project, take that as an opportunity to really think about what materials are you interested in and going to accept in your community. Once you have that starter list, it's much easier to just expedite projects in the future and then save money on the actual installation. And with all of this, just recognize that this is a good opportunity to test these concepts and projects, to adjust them if something isn't working. You can refine them before you come back for construction. And if it isn't working, you can ultimately remove them. These are, again, paint and planters that can just be, the paint either wears down after a season with winter, or if it's temporary paint, can just wash away in a hard rain. So that is hopefully some inspiration and a little bit of guidance on how you might be able to approach this in Westbrook. A lot of links here for the materials that I referenced earlier, but I'm happy to answer any questions on those or just technical questions about how we've managed to do this in Burlington.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole.
That was great. Can we get, would you mind sharing your slide deck with us? And we'll use it as a PDF so people can't take it, but they could get the links.
Yeah.
Or something like that. So thank you you could email it to Abigail or me, and we'll share it with today's participants.
Perfect.
So,
Yeah.
Abigail, you want to guide the conversation?
Yeah, so we wanted to make it a fairly short presentation to give you all some time to just open it up to conversation and questions. And obviously, we also have Bob on the line with Maine DOT, since our main street is a state street. And then Kara as well. Obviously, if you want to jump in with anything. So,
Yeah, so the route going through town is a state road. Yeah,
State
I was going to
25.
ask Nicole if any of your roads in Burlington are state roads and how your intersection was with Vermont DOT.
Yeah, we did have one of our quick build projects was on a state route that goes through town. We just designed our concepts and sent it over to our local district office to get their feedback before we did the installation. They gave us the okay. Some of the intersection markings that we used, they recognized were markings that they would not reinstall if they came back through and repaved the roadway, but they were fine with us installing them and then reinstalling them later after they removed them after repaving. But with the basic quick build approach, we did some curb extensions in this location. They were fine with those materials, and the approach, again, we're following the footprint of what a permanent curb extension would be. So it really just came down to these temporary materials, and they gave us the okay to go ahead with that.
Great. Bob, do you want to comment at all?
Well, I didn't see anything in the presentation that we'd necessarily object to. Obviously, we'd want to look at every situation on a case-by-case basis and pipe in on that. Actually, one item, perhaps a red flag item, was the extent of the paint, perhaps, on some state roads. I know there's been some discussions with Portland, Maine in the past about the paints they've used on crosswalks. And that's something we need to get the state traffic engineer involved in if we're going to do any significant changes with paint in the areas of crosswalks.
do you have any guidance you can share on that right now, or is it just a case-by-case basis kind of thing?
Yes, I'm afraid that's all I can say at this point.
I understand that there's some new guidance on that too that's being worked on now related to crosswalk painting. I don't know if you've seen that, but I think it's in draft form.
That's guidance or not?
State.
Could you guys hear that?
I did not hear that, no.
Kara said she believes there's some new state guidelines on paint
In draft form.
in draft form
In crosswalk.
in crosswalks.
Okay, I'll look into that.
Great.
It's being recorded now.
What kind of questions do we have, or reactions or thoughts, especially because you do have such a cross section of public safety, emergency, all here?
I saw she had a slide there. I think there was some speed bumps or something in the road. Oh, yeah. And then to the left of that, there was some delineators as well in one of your slides. And in my position, you know, snow plowing comes to mind. And what's the, does the bike path process go away in the winter? In other words, the bike path doesn't exist, which in my house, my son rides his bike in the winter, which I still don't get. And are those speed bumps that, you know, the black and the white ones that were about curb height, are those removable? And do they take them out in the wintertime, the city of Burlington, along with the delay?
Yeah, so those were two separate projects, but the one that had the traffic calming device, and we were testing out speed cushions, and it's a similar footprint to like a speed bumper, speed hump, but they have two cutouts basically for wheel path of large vehicles. We tested that out with our fire department on a route that they frequent pretty often. And because that one was just a test, this was a rubberized material that was just anchored into the roadway. We did just leave it there for the warm months, and then we removed it for winter. But our intent is to go back in and fully construct those with asphalt, which would be there year round. We have a lot of other speed humps throughout the city that are permanent installations. So most of our traffic calming does stay year round. We do plow those streets. The speed cushion we know is going to take some special attention plowing with those wheel paths in the middle, but they do stay year round. And then the protected bike lanes also stay year round. Burlington does maintain our sidewalks as well as our streets, so we have a whole fleet of sidewalk plows, and we just made sure that the bike lanes we've designed, they can either be cleared with the sidewalk plow themselves, or they're wide enough to be plowed with our smallest street plow. So those do stay through the winter. There are some locations that we've considered that it could be seasonal though, and it really does come down to the characteristics of those individual streets. But our intent for the most part is to have these be a permanent installation and stay year round.
Are you the city planner?
I am one of the planners. I am a transportation planner in our Public Works department.
Public Works, okay. Is it possible to put that slide back up
Yeah.
without too much trouble?
Yeah, I'm sure I can find it. Let me just, I'll pull up my slideshow and then I'll just scroll back through here and find it.
The way to get to yes.
Yeah. No, it's a really good question. And we do, so this is the one of our protected bike lane in wintertime. So we met with our street maintenance crew before we did the installation. We wanted to make sure we had the widths right and that it could be cleared with a sidewalk plow. And then we meet with them pretty regularly as the season goes on just to understand how is it working, what trouble are they running into, what are we hearing from the community in terms of their reaction, either driving by or trying to bike through this. So before I jump to the other speed hump and traffic calming question, did you have other questions on this one?
That's a one-way street?
It is.
Okay. That makes it a little easier. I've worked with those delineators. Those are the type you heat the pavement and then you stick it down onto the pavement. And
so these ones, we had the option of getting that epoxy patch. We opted to do anchors on these. And one thing we learned, we had the option with the installation to do 2 anchors, 1 at each end, or 3 anchors that had 1 in the middle. Just to save time, we tried 2 anchors, but after our first winter realized we really should have done 3 because when the plows did hit them, they tended to bend like you can see in the beginning of the photo here, or it would just rip one of the bolts out and they would kind of turn sideways and sit in the bike lane. So they had to go out pretty regularly and remove the damaged bases. So we should have just done 3 anchors and taken the extra time initially. But yeah, so these are anchored in instead of the epoxy.
And about how many miles of sidewalk do you plow in the winter?
We have about 130 miles.
What's that?
130 miles.
You plow 130 miles of sidewalk?
We do.
I get it.
How many miles do you have, Artie?
We have probably 130 miles of sidewalk, but we don't plow 130 miles. We plow about 30 miles of sidewalk. And I think Nicole said that the sidewalk plow does the bike lane as well.
That's true.
So the wing goes by and shoves the snow into the bike lane and hopefully doesn't take out the delineators, right?
Yep.
Unless the plow driver's got an attitude that night.
Yep.
And then the sidewalk turn would go through it, move it all the way to the right, the clearing. It looks like there was room on that road for a bike lane appropriately, and there's no parking on the left side.
Yep, there's parking on the left side. And yeah, the reason we tried this as a protected lane is, you know, we're not sure if because it's left side parking, but we found that without the protection, driver's tendency was to just drive in the bike lane. So we kept hearing from the biking community that they really wanted a way to keep drivers out of the bike lane. I'd say the biggest challenge that we have found with this project through the wintertime has been the frequency of clearing that we've had to do after a big storm in the blocks that have more driveways. So it's less about the back and forth snow clearing between the regular plow and the sidewalk plow than it is all of the private plowing that happens at the driveways and then just dumps more snow into the bike lane. That we learned after the first 2 storms. We need to take more passes on this bike lane than we had originally anticipated.
Yep. Right, that's like just the icebreaker. I know I feel you pain.
You want to look at that other slide?
Yeah, find that one.
And if anybody else on the webinar has questions, please feel free to put them in the chat feature, and we can make sure we ask them.
I think I missed it. Let me jump back again.
Okay.
Oh, I think I know where it is. Yeah. There we go. The bottom left photo.
Is that the one? That's with the fire truck.
No.
Oh.
None of those photos.
The top right has those little bumps.
Oh, yeah, there was another slide with the
Yeah.
same top right.
Those like zebra bumps.
Right, zebra bumps. And
Yeah.
also have, I think, those white type of delineators in there. And there's a lot of stuff in the roadway.
Yeah.
And in
That
the
is a lot.
wintertime, yeah, because when those are buried under
Oh.
snow, those are hard for a plow driver who's been plowing 18 hours
Mm-hmm.
a.m. and all of a sudden all the zebras are on the sidewalk.
Right.
The zebras.
So
Yeah.
Nicole, the photo with the fire truck, those are those wheel gaps that you were referencing, right? So those little black squares are actually raised?
Yes.
Huh. So yeah, how does the plow work through that?
Yeah, so they just plow over it as if those wheel cutouts were not there. And the snow basically then builds up in between the bumps, melts again when the weather warms up enough. But with the snow packed in between, then it basically just functions more like our typical speed humps that are just continuous all the way across.
So it's like speed bumps with wheel ruts cut in them.
Exactly.
Okay.
I like that.
Yeah,
I have
that is.
a question with the dump truck there, because we, Westbrook, have a upper system. So we would not be able to do with that image. If we had the vertical ones and if the truck was in the top.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of things going on. Trash pickup, but that arm actually probably goes out 10 feet.
Okay.
But, it would take that much longer to do trash.
Right.
And, which is a lot of time. You add up, 6,000 stops. But I just don't know.
What was the goal of those in that top right photo?
Yeah, so both of those pictures on the right were the same pilot project, and we wanted to test out a couple of different materials. So we tried these low bumps that we knew our trucks could drive over without any issue to do trash and recycling pickup. We also tested out the taller white posts. They're shown on the corner here, but we also included them on some sections of this protected bike lane. And we were trying to gauge the impacts to both our trash and recycling pickup, the impacts to traffic that may get stuck behind the trash and recycling pickup in the areas where we had the taller posts and they couldn't really go curbside, and just generally test the materials themselves. And there were a couple different ways we tested. So in the recycling pickup area where we used the tall posts, our intent was that the residents would put their blue bins in the bike lane itself. So, because our recycling trucks, well, most of our recycling in the city is just a blue box. We have some homes and residences that have the big wheeled toters, and so we can use the arm on the truck to unload them. But for the most part, our driver is getting out at every stop to pick up the blue bin and put it in the truck. So we were trying to make it easier for them to not have to walk all the way curbside if they were stopped at the edge of the bike lane. That had some challenges, both with the traffic impacts on this road in particular. It's one of our busiest roads. And it worked pretty intermittently with trying to get residents to put the bins in the bike lane rather than curbside. So the lower, we call these armadillos, those little zebra things. Armadillos worked best in terms of just letting the trucks drive over the devices and get to the curbside locations for the trash and recycling pickup. But in general, the low armadillos were more challenging for drivers. We kept finding that even though they're really visible, and we would sporadically have posts as well to let people know that there was something in the bike lane, cars would drive into them all the time. There were a lot of hubcaps on the side of the road. So yeah, it was a good learning process in terms of, again, like, you know, the material seemed like it would work well, and in some ways did work well, but ultimately, if we were to keep this long-term, we needed a different solution for materials there.
I have a question. This is for Robert at DOT. Let me preface this a little bit by saying I previously worked in a community that had a similar downtown or commercial district, and it was on a highway. Eventually, the city took over ownership of that particular part of the road, that is to say the maintenance, et cetera, and took away those sort of financial responsibilities from the state. I have no idea if the city of Westbrook would be remotely interested in that. But I guess my question to you is, if they were and were willing to take on those financial responsibilities, is that something the state has done historically? I ask this in the context of sort of it might be easier to implement some of these ideas in the long term, not just for Westbrook, but for any other main community town that has a similar situation.
Right. Well, a good portion of Westbrook is in the urban compact zone, so the city has the responsibilities for maintenance and upkeep of those areas. So I guess what your question is, if a community wanted to take over a state road in a particular area to try to implement some of these changes, some of what we would, you know, our focus is going to be on safety. We're going to want to look at what the speed limit is on that section of the highway. You know, there's certain things that may not be allowed based on whatever the speed might be going through there.
No, I guess what I'm sorry, I'm not being clear enough. What I'm asking is the state ever willing to give up that being a state highway and becoming a city road? I mean, it's sort of, at least in our community, from Brighton to whatever that street is where Convenient MD is, that's what we're talking about, I think. It's really not, I don't know, it's maybe a mile and a half long, a little longer than that. I mean, so it's sort of a gap spot to my mind, and better positioned, at least in current usage, as something other than a state highway, more right. Street.
Right.
Bob, I wonder, could you talk about what the urban compact is? I have an idea of what it is, but I think it'd be helpful for understanding their role, responsibilities, and jurisdictions.
Right. So in certain built-up areas, and it's associated with population, it's associated with, I believe, a number of entrances and driveways and whatnot along particular roads. The municipality has the responsibilities for the maintenance of those particular highways. You know, whether it be the winter maintenance or upkeep of the striping and in the summer months and signage and whatnot. I personally don't know the exact criteria that's used in determining when a certain highway is turned over to a community, but it's, you know, I think, again, population and density are pretty much the governing factors.
My understanding is that when that contract goes into place, local jurisdiction manages the road. So they would sort of manage it at the local level, so long as they're keeping within MDOT regulations. Is that right?
Well, that's correct. And, you know, in terms of permitting, say for entrances or driveways, yeah, it's the local jurisdiction that governs.
I have one follow-up question to that too. Nicole, I'm curious what you guys do in Vermont and in Burlington related to speeds, because here in Maine there seems to be a conflict between, you know, community desire to slow down speeds, which increases safety, and posted speeds on roads, which seem to drive a lot of decisions here in Maine. And there's, you know, fundamental conflict there. And just curious what you guys do to address that.
So we have done a couple things. Initially, this was probably, I'm not sure, 8 or so years ago, we decided that we did recognize the importance of lowering speeds. So we've taken 2 different approaches to this. We did several speed studies of various streets around the city. We basically selected a handful of streets that fit every type of street classification, and ultimately found that we had enough data to support going to a citywide speed limit of 25 miles an hour. That's as low as we're able to go based on state regulations. We can't go any lower than that unless we're in a downtown core, or I think on our waterfront. So that is what we have citywide. We have, I think, 4 streets that do have 30 miles an hour still, just because they are larger roadways, and we haven't done any street design changes to try to lower the speeds. The second thing that we do, because we can't set a speed limit less than 25, we still recognize that we can design our streets for lower speed limits, and that is often what we do, especially on neighborhood streets. So those are streets where we will usually do more extensive traffic calming. We do a lot of curb extensions. We recognize the benefits there for stormwater treatment as well. It can be a good opportunity to create rain gardens or just channel water and runoff and get it out of our stormwater system. Can also be an opportunity to just add green space into a neighborhood that may be lacking space for trees or other landscaping in general. But they do have this traffic calming element in terms of narrowing the roadway as well. Some streets we do need to do more, and that's where we will usually try speed humps, speed bumps, and that sort of thing.
I'm curious, how much did that speed study cost? It sounds like that's maybe a more cost-effective way to address that problem.
You know, it actually didn't cost anything. We worked with our regional planning commission to collect the data, and that's a free service they offer to all of their member communities. And so we just had to give them enough advance notice basically to let them know we're going to need a lot of data collection assistance. We did all of the data analysis ourselves, and so it was, yeah, just compiling all of the data and putting it together. So that was no cost projects.
I got a question on we had a slide up of a painted intersection.
Mm-hmm.
Just what, was that in your community? And
Yeah.
What were some of the kind of challenges and benefits of that?
So that photo is actually out in Portland, Oregon. The challenges with painting the intersections, one, the logistics of physically painting the intersection. We generally are only considering painted intersections here if it's tied to a community project. So we want to have a community partner that can help us maintain these and that has enough interest in keeping it in place. We know we don't have the capacity to go back and do these special intersection treatments everywhere. So finding the right community groups is important. And then that annual maintenance is the other challenge. I think a lot of times too, so I guess two pieces. We often hear interest from the community in doing painted treatments like that as traffic calming. We try to steer them away from thinking about it as traffic calming and thinking about more of a neighborhood or community enhancement instead. There's very little data that shows that it has much of an impact on traffic calming. So it's really an enhancement and a community project.
Other questions in the room?
I do think it's worth mentioning that what we're talking about as a design committee for our tactical urbanism, the way that we'd like to find the way it's best to relates to crosswalks, relates to pedestrian islands, and we did parking day last year. I think we were the first town other than Portland to do that, so we want to repeat that, but make it bigger again, and then maybe eventually someday there's issues with Dana Wharton Mill and where the parking is. We know that's complicated with the transition of ownership, but that's a project we're interested in. So I guess while we're all in the room, I should just put that on the table because I know there's been some concern, and I just want to make sure that while we have a lot of experts here, we can take advantage of that wisdom.
Witnesses.
You say with experts.
So are your projects that the design committee has identified, has public works and public safety, do they also have similar concerns with those parts of town?
Yeah, that's my understanding.
That's great.
Our advocacy.
So that's this team that's here today, which is who I first brought these ideas to. I know some of them are fine as is. Like one of them that we're talking about is just adding no parking zones next to crosswalks. And that's something that Jenny, our city planner, already sort of has on her, list to do.
Great.
Once those places are identified. But I think once we get into some more going into the street type of things, like bump outs and curb extensions, and putting things on the existing pedestrian islands, I think there were some concerns there as far as safe. And again, I think that's why this program that Burlington has is really wonderful, because they've gone through those safety issues and they see, okay, we need to make sure that we do it this way, so that while it's being installed, it's safe. The installation itself, like the design of it, is safe and up to engineering standards and all of that. So I guess if you could go into like a little more detail, Nicole, on that side of things, as far as it going through engineering and being, again, the two sides of safety, a safe project, a safe installation, but then also safe for the people that aren't installing it.
And let me quickly add that what we've been talking about is just those weekend pilot projects.
Yes.
We're not a 30-day, at least in year one, we're trying to think long-term about this. Year one is a two or 3 day deal. Your next 2020 is maybe something, that we learn from the data we gain and the input and do something different and better, et cetera, and then continuing on. So.
Yeah, that's helpful. So as we were developing both our demonstration project guide and the quick build design guide, we met with our fire department regularly to make sure that the design treatments that we were considering would work for them. Their biggest concern, even in our area, the medians you gave as an example, and the option of putting things like planters or bollards or anything in the center of the roadway, we're still continuing to work through that. We do have a plan to try a demonstration for some of those this year to work with them. Their main concern is the impact to their response times. So we're still grappling with that too. Which is why we end up doing a lot of the curb extensions from the corner and building our way in. Much more comfortable with that approach. Really the only consideration that they've given there is proximity to fire hydrants. And so if we're near a fire hydrant, we just have to make sure that we've left enough space from any planters nearby. And we also just have clear guidance from them on basically how far away a fire hydrant needs to be from the roadway to make sure they can still run the hose from their truck. So we have clear guidance from them initially, but we also have a standing meeting with our fire department once a month so that we can just run it by them if we have any new projects or things that we want to bring up and get their input on. In terms of the standard designs and the engineering, similar to the fire department process when we developed the demonstration guide, and more importantly, I think the quick build design guide, since that really has engineering standards for all of these projects. We did have engineers involved in the design team, and then we made sure our city engineer reviewed all of this along the way. There were a few of the design concepts that were in there that we had to adjust. It was based on his feedback, but also, again, running it by the fire department or running it by our maintenance teams to make sure that these could be maintained year round. So we made all of those adjustments before we even finalized the guide and before we got anything on the ground. So for the most part, the elements that are in the design guide, again, like we tried to follow standard engineering in terms of the basic footprint. It's more about the different materials that we're using. So we have, standard travel lane widths that we need to accommodate on various types of roadways. And then that helps us figure out then, if, again, we're going to do a curb extension, we know how much room we have to play with. And then it's just a matter of kind of sizing out a standard design to fit that specific street. So we did go through that process of making sure we had engineered drawings that could be safe to install, but also safe in the roadway for a long period of time.
And I can just add a little bit there too. So when we do our demonstration projects, both for the tactical urbanism lightning grant, we provide some support, and also for Build Maine, we work with ransom engineers who they have a very efficient way of creating sort of engineered designs that are overlaid onto photos. But they, will look at turn radius and other things like that to make sure that they're workable. And then I would just also second that in Stanford, for example, we tried something in the middle of the intersection to try to help break up the crossing distance, but make something in the middle. The fire department on site, we ended up adjusting that to meet their needs and their turning radius. And then at Build Maine this year, we're also testing again another approach to left-hand turn traffic calming, which I think is the first time it's going to be used anywhere in the state, and that something into the intersection, but it's something that can be driven over. So we're going to see how that works with the fire department there, and encourage everyone to come check that out.
Can you explain to me left-hand turning calming?
Yeah, it's hard to explain without the visual.
Okay.
And, I can share the plans for this year's installation with you guys, but basically you have coming into the intersection behind the crosswalk, you have some vertical bollards to let people know that there's something coming up. And then on the inside of the crosswalk, you have, it's sort of a curb stop that goes in, but it's mountable. And it channels the left-hand turn driver so that you can't just sort of continue on without stepping on the brake. It makes you slow down and you have to take a more abrupt turn.
Yep.
So it's been like the data behind it is incredible, and it's such a simple fix, but it's really slow down vehicle speeds at this critical place where you have a lot of pedestrians.
Great.
And as ransom engineers, is that a firm or a type?
It's a firm.
Yeah.
Yeah, we provide contact information. They're just a great resource.
Nicole, I have a question about who do you go to talk to think this sort of stuff through for experience? You mentioned Portland, Oregon. Are you just Googling stuff, or do you hop on the horn when you have questions about, will this material work? Will this new product work? experienced with this and failed and is now succeeding? Who do you talk to?
So we are members of NACTO, and so that's usually our first place that we'll check. We'll just reach out to the other NACTO community members, and sometimes we'll run a whole project by them. We'll just share a set of design plans and let them pick it apart. And other times we'll just ask specific questions about, we're thinking about trying this material, who's tried it, what has your experience been both with the vendor. Some vendors are really easy to work with and stand behind their product. Others, it's a little more challenging. But then for the materials themselves, both the installation and kind of longevity. So that's our go-to. Otherwise, we often look to Montreal because it's so close to Burlington, and they are another northern community. They do a lot of this work. So we're constantly checking in up there to see what they're doing. And just, I think conferences are the other resource, both to look at new materials that are coming out, but for networking. The NACTO conference itself is really helpful for that because it is, I don't know the exact percentage, but it seems like 90% of the attendees are actual city staff. And so they're dealing with these specific issues on a regular basis. And it's sometimes easier to get the information that you need in a group like that. There are a lot of other conferences that you don't get the same kind of frank opinions and information that you would by just going straight to the people that are doing this on a day-to-day basis. So those are probably the most helpful resources that I found. But yeah, occasionally Google does help. Also, going directly to the vendors is another good option. So like if there's one material that you're considering, you can often just ask the vendor, do they know of other communities that have used this for the type of installation that you're thinking of? They'll often have that contact information, or just with that lead itself, you can go and find a good contact person to just bug and ask some questions.
Is Westbrook a NACTO member? Or Maine has none? Wow. Okay. That's sad. Sounds like a great resource.
Yeah, I will say it's pricey, but it is such a great resource.
Okay. Interesting.
We do have their guide for sale at Building.
Okay, great. That's great.
Nicole, have you had to create budget lines for these projects specifically, for future development and design?
Yeah, so we have a general transportation budget. When we started thinking about the demonstration projects and the quick build approach, we debated if we should kind of section out a whole chunk of our budget specific to those, and decided that we were just going to keep it in the general budget, and they're a project like any of our other projects would be. And so it really just comes down to every year we look at our work plan and decide how many quick builds we want to do, or how much we want to set aside to like reconstruct one of our quick builds to be a permanent project. So we set some basic goals for how many projects we want to do each year, and then how much reconstruction we want to do. But it all just falls into the general transportation budget.
Are you guys generally at this point trying to do quick builds before you do permanent construction? Is that sort of your workflow at this point?
Yeah, it really is. I'm even trying to think of a project that we would jump into permanent construction right away, and yeah, it's pretty rare at this point. We do quick builds more often than not, partially because it is less expensive, but I think the biggest benefit is there are still so many questions we get from the community when we come out with new project designs, a lot of skepticism, and so the quick builds just allow us to let the community try it out and give us responses and feedback based on real life scenarios, not just their perceptions and assumptions about how it's going to work. And that could be working in both ways. They could think that what we're doing is not enough and it's not going to have the impact they want, or they may think that we're going too far and it's going to be difficult to drive or work around. So it helps in both sides.
Other questions? Bob, do you have anything else to share?
I just wanted to follow up on that question about taking over a section of roadway that someone in the audience asked.
Oh, yeah.
And certainly, if you can send me the specific information, we can give you a definitive answer on if that's a possibility.
Great. Thank you.
Nicole, I have one more question. You've been doing this for 4 or 5 years now. How long have you been implementing this program?
As a formal program, I think we created our tactical urbanism guide in I think we started it in 2015.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Would you say with a lot of these quick design, quick implementation projects, you must be sort of getting better at designing projects? It's one thing to have design guidelines, but the practical daily maintenance, installation, all that sort of stuff, you must be able to see now what's going to work ahead of time much better than even just starting from scratch.
Yeah, definitely. You know, I think the materials alone, we're realizing which ones are kind of worth the investment and will hold up, which ones are easy to install and maintain. We're also understanding more about what our own crews can manage. Our first year of installation, we had a really ambitious work plan and had to sit down at the beginning of the year, figure out what could our crews install and maintain, check in halfway through to see, like, do you still think we're going to get this all done? Kind of falling behind schedule at the beginning. And also the understanding who we needed to work with outside of our own crews. Sometimes like for the planters and the landscaping as an example, initially we tried to work with our parks department to see if they could help us with that, and we were just doing too much and it would have overtaxed their resources. So we ended up having a separate contract with just a commercial landscaper to do all of that maintenance for us. Even in that, we're learning a lot in terms of getting more specifics on which plantings work well in the right of way. So we're getting clearer guidance on those little details. And the paint itself, you know, and also just coordinated timing. Again, first year we had what we thought was a good work plan in terms of our traffic crew would go out and do the painting, followed by our right-of-way crew to do the installation. And what we found is often there was not enough coordination, and so there would be big delays between the paint and the installation. So yes, we're getting better at figuring out how to implement projects in the way that they should roll out and keep them in place and maintain them in a way. You know, the one thing I'll share that we have not figured out very well yet is graffiti on some of our quick builds, the planters especially. The planter material that we chose works really well in terms of they're self-watering planters. So basically half of it is just a reservoir for water. They're great for keeping the plants alive and reducing the amount of time the landscapers need to go out, but some of the particular colors of the tags just don't want to come out. So that's one thing we're kind of grappling with is, do we paint all the planters just as a proactive way to deter tagging? Do we do an art project on all of them? So yeah, there's still some pieces we're trying to figure out.
Do you think your other city park departments appreciate this system because there's so much communication, or do you think it stresses them out because there's so much change all the time?
I think it depends on who you talk to. I'd say from the management team that we work with most directly, they appreciate how much we are constantly checking in with them to make sure that the plans we're considering will work for their crews, that we aren't overloading their crews in terms of like the installation needs each year. but the day-to-day crews who have to do all the maintenance, they might have different feedback. We definitely keep them on their toes. We like to, you know, at the end of every winter, give little prizes to the stellar drivers that we have that did not rip out all of these plays. Like, we have some of the best drivers in the state, we say, because they do an awesome job, and we know it's not easy. But we also remind them, like, again, these are safety projects. If they were quick builds or if they were permanent, like, somehow the roads have to change. So change is never easy. We know it's a stress for them at times, but it's important. And so luckily we have management team in place that share that philosophy and to just keep hammering that same message in, that although it's hard, we know it's a shift, that it's extra stress as they're out driving, that there is a method to our madness, there's a reason for it, these are safety projects, it's what the community needs, and we just constantly thank them for being flexible and trying to keep up with everything we're throwing at them.
Not the worst.
Other questions or comments? Yeah, Kara. Okay, Kara's back at
Leave
it.
the screen over there.
I know.
We've encountered in some of our projects a interest in seeing engineering studies or, you know, speed studies, and I'm just wondering, have you been able to avoid those costly studies by doing the quick builds and sort of working incrementally toward the permanent installation? Or are you still doing those?
We don't do many engineering studies after we've done a project. We will often do speed studies and data collection, less as a community request, but more I think it's just as backup data in case we get the request in the future. Like, we want to see that what we're doing is having an impact and that it's that they are working. So we generally, with all of our, especially if it's a traffic calming project, we usually will just program it into our work plan that before we do one of the installations, we collect data to see what their baseline is, and then we'll try to collect data a year later to see how it's impacted any behaviors. That could be for the speed and the volume of cars, but, you know, if it's a shared project, let's say with a bikeway, then we're also going to count bikes before and after. If it's a crosswalk project, we'll try to do crosswalk pedestrian counts and a yield analysis beforehand and afterhand to see if the treatments that we're installing are having an impact. The crosswalk ones we've started doing more recently because the most common request we get for crosswalk treatment enhancements are the rapid flashing beacons. But they are expensive and we can't install them everywhere. So we're trying these other traffic calming approaches at crosswalks as a lower cost option that should have a similar effect on people's ability to cross the street safely. And so doing that type of engineering study before and after is something that we think is important. Oftentimes we'll do these in-house, but again, we partner with our regional planning commission pretty regularly, and they have an annual work program where we can basically submit our requests for assistance. And it's just it's a one-year cycle, so we have to think in advance about the projects that we'll want to do the upcoming year. There's not as much flexibility to just jump in with new projects midterm. But more recently, our local advocacy group has showed more interest in being involved in some of the data collection because I think they see the value in being able to show the benefit of some of these changes. So they're taking more leadership in getting the community involved in doing some of this data collection themselves.
So it's mostly traffic counts, traffic turning, and then speed.
Yeah, most of our data collection is the traffic volumes and speed, which would be done with tubes across the road. If we're counting bikes, we'll either use the tubes or More recently, we're going to a camera system. And if we're doing pedestrian counts, it is someone sitting out on the road, just manually counting. Those are the most common counts that we'll do. Sometimes we will do intersection counts that looks at the number of cars, well, not just cars, the number of all movements going through an intersection and where they're going, but we don't do those quite as often.
We give out a trophy at the end of the year to the guy who hits the most mailboxes.
So now you just need a partner to that trophy.
When you started this, this whole process back in, I don't know, 2013?
15, I think she said.
If you're Abigail, for instance, like where did you start to get buy-in to this? Because, you know, a lot of us at the table here, we're sort of like the managers of the worker bees.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, I don't think you just started painting bike lines because you felt like it. And, you know, you just have to go to the top up there in Burlington, start to get buy-in.
Yeah, you know, it's I think really it's really evolved over the years. I'd say there's more support for this more recently, and it has come more from the top down. But honestly, I think a lot of the support, even leading up to this whole quick build and tactical approach, has been from the bottom up. So it's really been the community pushing the city, our city councilors, our directors, and the mayor's office to do more. And they're not quiet about it. And I think that continued push from them has led the administration and our directors and all of our managers to realize, like, this sentiment is not going away. We need to address this. From our highest level, I think the mayor recognizes that for Burlington to stay competitive, especially in the economic market of attracting new businesses and young employers, changing infrastructure types and giving people different options for how to get around is important. That especially our younger employers, they're less inclined to own and drive a car. If they can live in the city and try other modes, that's something they're most interested in. And even if they are driving, they seem to recognize the importance of a healthy community in all aspects, but especially in the street. So it's not just seen as a transportation improvement, it's really seen as an economic improvement and something that we need to do to stay competitive and attract new businesses and employees.
I think I hear my marching orders as a
I was
design
like, that was
committee.
the quote. I'm
Yeah,
writing that
right,
down.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think we have our committee, well, some of them that didn't have to work, you know, we've got a good dozen or so people interested, and I appreciate all the city employees being here today and being open to that, and I will say thank you on behalf because we're very interested and passionate about believe all those things. You know, it's interesting. We've got a huge development down the way that sort of adopted these principles in a lot of ways, and so it's now we're implementing them traditionally as we always have been again. So if we need to be a little louder, if you're telling me that, we can do that.
That's great.
I already asked the question though. So.
That's on me. That's on me.
Great. You think that's okay?
Thoughts or questions? Feelings?
Was Was this
I feel like there's
helpful?
probably some feelings.
How about thumbs up if it was helpful in the room to those of you here? Good.
Thanks to
Thanks for
NBC.
coming.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thanks,
Great.
Dan and Robert.
Thank you, Nicole and Bob, for and Kara for participating. And we'll share the presentation that has some of the links to the guides, the build guides and whatnot.
Yeah.
Right.
All right, thank you, and I'm glad we got the audio worked out. That was a little stressful the last few minutes before we were supposed to start.
Good job.
So thank you all.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay, bye.
Good luck.
Thank you.